Greetings, urban farmers, gardeners, and healthy food visionaries. Farmer Greg here, and welcome to the 530th episode of the Urban Farm Podcast, where every day we work together to educate and inspire you to become part of your food revolution. Have you thought about why you do what you do? This is a daily process for me, and it is the reason I put so much energy and money into producing our Urban Farm Podcast. What you may not know is that it costs $158 per episode to get you this incredible information. And as you can hear, we don't do sponsorships, as we want to keep our message as clean as possible. It has always been my intent to pay for our podcast production with our online content sales, and that hasn't worked very well. So we're trying something new, and I need your help so that we can continue delivering this great content. And quite honestly, this is an easy learning-filled request. I've teamed up with some amazing gardening visionaries to host a free online edible backyard summit the week of March 23rd. When you attend, you'll get free access for the week to the knowledge of these food growing experts and have an opportunity to get your burning questions answered live. Plus, we're going to release 5 modules of our comprehensive Growing Food the Basics course so that you can dig deeply into the fundamental concepts that will set you up for success no matter where you're at in your food growing journey. So here's what I need. The most helpful thing you can do is to share our ediblebackyardsummit.com page far and wide with your friends, on social media, in your garden clubs, and probably places we've never even thought about. Next, please attend the free Edible Backyard Summit. My hope is that some of you will dive in, support our work, and purchase the extended summit and learn more about gardening and creating your own edible backyard. Our intent with this Edible Backyard Summit is for you to discover how you can truly thrive with a healthy life and get reconnected with your food while learning how to live a more self-reliant life, feeling secure knowing that you have a food supply right in your backyard. When you attend the Edible Backyard Summit, you'll be part of a community of people from around the world that are all on a mission to make their backyards and patios into an edible paradise. Whether you're starting your first garden or maintaining an existing one, you will come out of this summit feeling revitalized and re-inspired to make growing and eating food the celebration it should be. Sign up for free by going to ediblebackyardsummit.com or texting backyard to 33444. I look forward to seeing you there. Today on our podcast, we have someone who has seen the world of yoga change from underground to mainstream. We're talking with Jay Brown about yoga's evolution. Jay is a yoga teacher, writer, and podcaster. He is at the forefront of a quiet yoga revolution based in healing that seeks to change the dialogue and direction of yoga practice in the West. His writing has been featured in Yoga Therapy Today, the International Yoga Journal, the International Journal of Yoga Therapy, and across the yoga blogosphere. His podcast, Jay Brown Yoga Talks, is an internationally renowned for raising the level of conversation. And as a side note, you might be thinking, Greg, why yoga? Well, I have a pretty long history of yoga practice, and my beloved Heidi is a longtime yoga teacher. So I thought it might be cool to bring the yoga conversation to our podcast because of how it has raised my consciousness around life and food. Welcome to the show today, Jay. Are you ready to rock yoga?
Absolutely, always.
Excellent. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at today?
Sure. I started in yoga in the early 90s in New York City. I was in my early 20s and, frankly, I was maybe a little messed up. My mom, not a little messed up, a lot messed up, I should say. My mom passed away of leukemia when I was 16.
I'm sorry.
And that's okay. I was really coming home to roost in my early 20s, and I was going down some pretty bad paths. And I managed to find a way out of that through yoga practice. It really transformed me. At that time, yoga was really still a very underground thing. It was pre-internet. So it was still like in living rooms and church basements more. And I showed up right when some people started to open these yoga centers in like storefronts.
Mm-hmm.
And like they had all sort of gone to India and met these gurus and come back and then opened these yoga centers and put their pictures up on these altars. And they were starting these group yoga classes. And that was a very new phenomenon. I wasn't really, prior to that, there wasn't just yoga classes everywhere like there is now. And eventually I sort of just fell into teaching myself, and then it boomed. The industry kind of exploded, and gyms started offering yoga, and big companies started jumping on board, and we all kind of rode this wave. And I ended up opening a yoga center in Williamsburg, Brooklyn in 2007, which I had for 10 years until the rent got too high and I couldn't keep pace anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately, I kind of came into my adulthood alongside yoga coming into the mainstream. And in that process, I did find my way to this totally therapeutic orientation. Because as the yoga world got more fitness oriented, I was still really interested in the contemplative aspect. That's why I got into it at the beginning. When I first started in yoga, advanced meant inner peace.
Right.
And nowadays, when you ask someone about advanced yoga, they think of a picture they saw of someone doing some crazy pretzel position.
Right.
So I ended up gravitating to my slogan is gentle is the new advanced. And I teach this totally therapeutic orientation now that adapts to people's individual needs. And so all of that is sort of how I got into it. And then I started the podcast four years ago when I was starting to let go of the center. Like the center was starting on a downturn and I didn't know what to do. And the industry was changing so much and nobody knew what to do. And I just started talking about things in a very transparent way. And a lot of people resonated with that. And it's grown and become like a major thing that I do now. But ultimately, I would say that the yoga practice I discovered is what healed this initial wound with my mom.
Oh, yes.
And that's really been why I'm so passionate about it, because what I've learned in the time I've been doing it and whatever I've experienced in my time is that just the ability to feel okay in yourself is this invaluable strength. So I've sort of dedicated my life to that some. And most, if not all of what I do as a teacher is very much in my mother's honor. So that's why I do what I do.
Wow.
And it's very cool that your partner is a yoga teacher too. And so I'm sure you get to see firsthand what it is to have somebody who has yoga in their life and shares that with other people and the kind of rewards that come from that.
Absolutely. And interesting, your pathway in happened about the same time that mine did. In 1994, a friend of mine said to me, Greg, you got to come and check out this yoga class. It was a Kundalini yoga class at the local Sikh ashram. And it was a little bit of yoga and a lot of breath work. And that was kind of my pathway in. And in looking back at the landscape of yoga studios here in the Valley, there weren't too many of them back there.
No, there really wasn't. I know that even when I opened, which was still later, 2007, at a time like maybe from 2000 to 2006, I was teaching at maybe 4 or 5 different centers. They were kind of popping up, but there wasn't that many. So
right.
You could just sort of hang a sign and people were showing up. Even in 2007 in Williamsburg, I had an A-frame sign that I put out on the street and 100 new people would walk in the door every month.
Wow.
Just because that sign was there.
Oh, nice.
And you can't say that that's true of every place. That was a very a market kind of situation. But I don't think that that's true now.
Right.
I think that with the advent of the internet and just changing landscape of the industry, just somebody opening up a shop like that and putting out a sign, I don't think you'd have that many people showing up.
Yeah.
Has certainly changed over the years. But the cool thing is, one of the things that's happened is there has been these big shifts. And one of those big shifts, and I don't know that this is anything we want to get into, is that what was the authorities for yoga, these guru figures, a lot of them have kind of fallen from grace.
Yep.
And fallen to scandals. And so the authority has really, the hierarchies that were there have kind of collapsed a bit. And in that way, there's been a little bit of a return to the underground. Like you said in your intro, that we went from underground to mainstream. Well, the mainstream's kind of bottomed out a little, I think. And so in a way, it's going a little bit back underground. And I think that's for the better. It's a little bit scary for a lot of people, but at the same time, it gets back to some of those roots, like you were saying, when you started and it was more about breath and inward reflection. Nowadays, it's gotten so fitness oriented. In a way, a little bit of devolution might be good.
Oh, big time. Big time. Well, yeah, because, you got all these Instagram and, all these people out here doing all this crazy, as you call them, pretzel moves that, quite honestly, for somebody 58 years old, is probably going to do more damage than good. Actually, for most people, it's probably going to do more damage than good, don't you think?
I do. I think that there is a bit of a myth for a long time about strength and flexibility, and that like maximizing strength and flexibility was a symbol of health. Like when you see those pictures, they're thought to be inspirational, but because they show an example of someone who has this kind of body control and strength and flexibility, and we associate that with being, wow, look at how healthy they are. But the problem is I know a lot of people, myself included, who were able to accomplish some of those kind of interesting, flashy things with our bodies, but we still had lots of pain and felt miserable.
Right.
So I think more and more people have had to admit, and that's a lot of what my show is about. I bring yoga teachers on and I don't write out any questions. We have these unscripted conversations and I just kind of ask them real stuff about, does your hip hurt too? You know, like to have really honest conversations about things that we weren't. And in a way, I do see, like, I feel very hopeful for that reason, that I feel like yoga has starting to have a bit of a renaissance, which is exciting.
And that's really important because a lot of people out there are getting a whole lot of hurt.
I do think that that's happening some. Sometimes there's a little bit of a thing of, oh, the yoga injuries are on the rise. And I'm a little bit skeptical of that, in that I do think that might be the case, but only because there's so many more yoga classes than ever before, that you look at the statistics, actually, like in terms of activities that people do, whether it's sports or other types of fitness, yoga is not at the top in terms of percentage of injuries and stuff. So I don't know that that's always true, that yoga is this horrible injurious thing. What I will say is that there's a lot of things that we're taught in yoga classes that were not true in terms of what poses will do for your body. So even the idea of strength and flexibility, you know, there's all kinds of athletes out there who train to accomplish things with their bodies who still have lots of pain and don't feel well. So what I think more and more people are coming to, and these are some fancy terms I'm going to throw out there, but there's an older idea about the human body that is sometimes called the postural structural biomechanical model for the human body. And then there's this newer idea about how the human body functions that's called the biopsychosocial model. And actually, this relates very much to farming. I know this is a farming podcast, but like I had someone on my show, we talked about this in terms of how you relate to the soil and how you relate to your body in a way. Like we've mechanized our bodies some in certain ways. And so even the science has really pointed to how some of the ideas in the past that we had weren't really accurate. And there's these new ideas about our nervous systems and our polyvagal, systems. And it's very interesting to see how there are this new evolution happening that I experienced myself as a more truthful idea.
Heidi is a yoga therapeutics teacher. And so I'm getting a lot of how to move more efficiently and not as hard on my body from her. And that's really what yoga therapeutics is about, right?
I think that is the big change. For a lot of time, it was all about teaching people how to do the forms with precision. And the idea was if you could accomplish these forms, then that would mean, I don't know, something, whether it's strength or flexibility or enlightenment, whatever it was, we were working towards it. And then at some point we realized that wasn't it. And ultimately some of the things that I taught years ago were hurting me. And the key to undoing that problem was finding a sense of what they might call proprioception, or knowing for yourself what's going on with your body. Like you say, how you're moving or how you're inhabiting your body. They sometimes call this somatics, somatic movement. And it's ultimately, I think, about facilitating people having their own experience of their own body so they would maybe have a clearer barometer for how they're doing and what they need.
Well, and that's just raising the consciousness about our body altogether. And that's all the way from what kind of food you put in to how you move and, how you stretch. And as we age, how we get older.
Absolutely. I think what I've observed, and sometimes you'll see when people try to do yoga for weight loss, because stuff like that sells really good, right? If I say yoga for weight loss and there's a picture of a really skinny person, then everybody wants to buy it. But what happens is people will try to use yoga poses as a way of like targeting muscle groups or burning fat. And I actually don't think that that's how yoga is effective in that regard. The way that I've seen yoga help people with their diet and their weight, even if that's something that they're trying to address, is that it helps facilitate, as you were saying, awareness about themselves. and you start to be much more conscious about what you're putting into your system because you're noticing how it feels. And that often leads to different choices. So I've watched people make pretty drastic changes about what they eat and how they live, not because I told them that they should do any of that.
Right.
In fact, if I tell them they should eat a certain way, that will likely have a reverse effect.
Exactly.
But offering tools that enable people to make their own determinations about what's best for them often lead to much smarter food choices, is what I was looking to point to.
Yeah. Well, it brings our consciousness all over the place. That's what I found for me in my life is when I started regularly doing yoga, it helped me get more conscious about all the choices I made.
Yeah. I think early on in my practice, it was very much about, like I said, trying to accomplish these forms. And then at some point, I met a teacher who just kept asking me this same question. He kept asking me, how do you feel? And I couldn't answer. I know, I knew like all this stuff, but I didn't know how I felt. And that inquiry, okay, how do I feel? And how does this make me feel? And how do I want to feel? That's actually how I personally changed how I was eating and how I was living, because I just wanted to feel okay, as I said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And if that became my goal, like I just want to feel okay in myself and not be freaking out, then I want to do the things that help me feel that way. And that involved changing my diet and who I hung out with and just about everything.
Exactly. Well, I think the more conscious we become about our surroundings, the more we're going to feel.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
When you drink that diet soda, pay attention for the next 2 hours, 4 hours. How does it make you feel? Or when you eat a lot of white bread, how does it make you feel? Or when you go to a yoga class and you do a move that maybe you have to push yourself a little farther, how does it make you feel? It's the same conversation.
Yeah, it's funny you brought diet soda up, because I flashed on this memory. When I grew up in the 80s in Los Angeles, my parents had a whole shelf in our fridge that was always stocked with at least 4 or 5 different flavors of Diet Shasta.
Mm-hmm.
And I look back on that now and look the way I'm raising my kids, it's so drastically different. And it comes back to get me. I really I've had to be very disciplined to change those patterns, but it's essential. Like I said, if I want to feel well, like you said, if I drink that, and I'm paying attention to how I feel, it doesn't line up, with what I want.
Yeah.
And that's actually the best way to motivate people, I think, is if you can get them to identify what they really want, which is usually to feel well, and you can get them to associate the choices that they make and our behaviors with it not leading in that direction or leading in that direction. That's when people, I think, feel more self-motivated to make the choice to go in that better direction.
Right. For yoga, what are some of the benefits people can derive from a regular practice?
Oh, I think the thing that has benefited me most, and I think sets yoga apart from everything else. There's lots of different benefits you could get, but the one that I want to say first is that yoga, at least the version I'm practicing and teaching, is very much about developing sustained attention. So the ability to put your mind on something and keep your mind there for as long as you want and then release it at will. Like that muscle of concentration and exercising that muscle of attention, in my experience, leads to facility where you get to have more say about what your mind does, which is really valuable.
Oh, yeah.
And leads to what we were talking about, like the awareness and all of that, like the basic muscle of having that awareness about what you need and making conscious choices is about ultimately, if you break it down, sustained attention. And sustained attention leads to clearer perception. You're able to see things more clearly, and that's where you are more emboldened to have your attitudes and actions express your purpose or the direction that you're hoping to go. Now, that's the coolest thing. Now, there's also, of course, just physiological benefits to moving. I have chronic pain issues I deal with, and you can manage chronic pain. And, when I'm talking to people who aren't yoga geeks, like if I'm at a party and someone asks me what I do and I say I'm a yoga teacher and they say, "What's that?" I would say, "Oh, well, I teach breathing and moving exercises that are really about lessening pain and easing stress and anxiety." So to me, those are the things that it's really about. It's about this way of easing the pains and difficulties that life presents so that we can experience and enjoy what's already taking place, which is a profound miracle that is you existing. In the same way that a flower blooms, your heart beats, and that we could have that wonder and awe about ourselves and our own systems is what I find to be the source of the healing ultimately.
Nice. And what you just spoke about the after effects of yoga are really the same after effects of eating a healthy diet. Because when we put bad stuff in, we feel bad and we're less focused. I know for me, if I eat too much sugar, man, my brain starts to go every which way, but not focused. So there's another overlap for us.
Absolutely. I know I have a 10-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old daughter. And I was just laughing with my wife the other day because they enjoy raw organic vegetables. And we had some friends over and they were kind of shocked watching. But at the same time, they're both really thriving and doing well.
Mm-hmm.
And I have just always felt like it's one of the least things I could do is put in things that help fuel them in a way that will give them the best chance to be healthy and well, And I think that choosing what I eat really did become profoundly important. And, I do think they're interrelated and interconnected, that when I was experiencing these other changes, as I was describing in terms of just facility with my mind, the changes in diet just went right along with that. Just makes more sense to eat in this way where my food's less processed and I'm eating more vegetables, that was a natural thing. It wasn't like I had to make myself do it even.
Right. It just becomes a habit.
Yeah. Becomes a habit that I want to keep.
Yeah, exactly. So in your bio, we talked about a yoga revolution. What is that? Because there's a level of importance here that I don't want to miss.
Well, I used the word Renaissance earlier, and I've kind of been moving away from revolution to Renaissance a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I think they might both apply. I think the revolution is, as I was sort of describing before, that at some point yoga had this contemplative root to it, where it was really about expanding consciousness and inner peace, maybe. And at some point, it changed to where it became about accomplishing strength and flexibility and a particular aesthetic even, And I think that people who started in their early 20s like me, who are now in their mid-40s, we're all reckoning with the reality that some things that worked for us in our 20s don't work for us anymore. And we still love yoga because of these transformative experiences we've had with it. And so the revolution is this kind of revolution of, I want to say soul, or I want to say depth. So people are kind of over the hype. Like we're talking about the Instagramification of yoga.
Yeah.
I actually think that people are done with it in the way, and it's true in other areas of our culture where people are kind of over it. We were flamboozled for a while, but not anymore. And because of that, I think that's why I'm managing to do what I'm doing. Because I'm not in the mainstream media of the yoga world. I'm just this one guy doing his thing from his attic, and people are resonating with that because there is this bit of renaissance or revolution of people who want to return to the depth, because we know that's where yoga really has something to offer us and society.
Yes, and part of the revolution is that there's been some teachers out there that have been not real appropriate.
Oh, well, if you want to go there, sure. I talk about this a lot on the show because when I started, like I said, in the early 90s, there was very distinct hierarchies and guru figures and these lineage traditions.
Yeah.
And, there was always issues in all of these hierarchical schools, but honestly, in the last few years, with the resurgence of the Me Too movement, a lot has come out, and a lot of these folks either have died, or even just after dying, people have come out and told more honest histories and stories about who these people were. And what I would say is that people who identified with those gurus as their connection, like, this person is my connection to the yoga, they're in a really bad place now because that person turned out to be a sexual abuser. and it's now not under dispute anymore.
Yeah.
And so that person has their whole connection to their healing in yoga to this person, and then that person isn't what they thought. And it's a really bad situation for a lot of folks. And there's a lot of cult-like dynamics and a lot of, you could just say, cults happening.
Yeah.
There's a lot of other people, though, who maybe had experiences with those teachers or studied in those lineage traditions, but their connection isn't so much to that person, but is more to the experiences they had in those practices. And those people, while I think I'm including myself, we have a lot to reckon with still, we're in a better place because it's not so tied up in that other person who failed us. And in a way, last thing I would say is that a lot of people are having to look inward for where the authority is. And I think that is ultimately for the best.
Yes.
The inward authority rather than some external authority will prevent a lot of these issues potentially.
And that's the reason I brought up this question, is because we have to not look outside of ourselves for a guru. We have to be our own guru, whether it comes to our diet or our yoga or our life. We have to be the powerful person in place, not somebody out there that's pulling the strings.
I think that's right. There are a lot of different philosophical viewpoints within yoga. And I have a particular viewpoint that is to what you were just saying, where if someone says to you, do this and it will help you become enlightened, or do this and it will help you become blank, whatever it is, that person is starting you from a place where you are lacking. They're saying you are not currently enlightened, or you are not currently whatever it is, and then you're going to have to make it happen or get there. And I subscribe to a viewpoint that starts from a place that you're entirely whole as you are, even with all your difficulty and pain, and that there isn't anywhere that you need to get to necessarily at all. And from there, you proceed. And you proceed in a way that is, in my experience, more empowered because of that, because you are, as one of my teachers would say, and it's an apropos metaphor, standing in your own ground.
Mm-hmm.
He would say, you are a flower blooming in your own garden, that you regard yourself with that kind of majesty. And that, I think, is a lot where the self-agency to find direction and purpose come from, which is what I said earlier is what yoga is really about.
Yeah. Well, and Heidi and I have talked about this a lot over the years, that we're not looking for gurus. We're looking for teachers that can help kind of point us, direct us, enlighten us, enliven us. And then we take that information and we do with it what makes us feel good. It's like, how many diets are there out there? And some of them work for some people and not for others. And it becomes a self-discovery process by which we have to move forward with life.
I think that's right. And there's that metaphor, and I won't strain it, but where you give the people the tools to get their own fish rather than just give them the fish.
Yep.
I think that's right. That folks who have had transformative experiences with yoga understand that it was a very personal thing that happens inside yourself, and you can't really do it for anybody else. You can't even know what anyone else needs to do. But in the sharing of your experience and your ability to make the tools work for you, that does often allow for someone to then do the same for themselves. That's when there's a wonderful teacher named Nishala Joy Devi, and she calls that the Namaste effect. And she wrote a book called The Namaste Effect. And basically she says in that moment, the distinctions between you and the other person disappear.
Nice. So for those people listening out there that don't know what yoga is or don't have a pathway in, what might you suggest for somebody to stick their little toe in and get started?
Well, I mean, nowadays there's so much available. There's like a lot of online stuff. I myself have live classes I do online as well as standalone videos. So there's lots of different stuff out there. I will say there are many different approaches and schools and systems, and they are not all the same. As you were saying, your wife, she's of a more therapeutic orientation like me. There are lots of other schools and systems that are not so much about that. They're much more about physicality and testing your ability to do more than you think you can. There's lots of different viewpoints. I have my producer in the back of my head telling them to go to my website.
Perfect. What is that?
But I also don't want to. I'm sure there'll be a link eventually, because it is certainly my pleasure to introduce people who have not had any prior experience to yoga before. Like that, right now, I moved to Pennsylvania 2 years ago after I let go of my center. And I took a space in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is a very rough neighborhood. But it's basically so low overhead, I can take it without stress. And I've ended up having this wonderful couple that have been coming to all my classes. And the man is a retired construction worker.
Oh, wow.
And he is the no experience with yoga, I have no idea what yoga is example. And it's just been so rewarding. He's like such a fantastic student. He's like so much better than some of the yoga teachers that come to train with me,
Right.
Because he's so pure in his inquiry. So to your question more, I would say looking for simpler practices that are geared towards well-being is my strong recommendation for folks who are first looking to establish some kind of practice in a sense that I'm pointing to. That the gentle yoga out there or the slower flows is probably where I would encourage you to start. Ideally, if there is a local center where you can go meet someone, that is the best. If you can meet a person who you feel like comfortable with and creates a welcoming place for you to come and experience some yoga, I think that is by far the best. I do know a lot of people feel intimidated to go to a yoga center, and there's not always as many of them as there used to be, or sometimes they're more like gyms.
Right.
So in those instances, I really do think it's a matter, you can find a lot of really great online stuff. I hate to say it, I was resistant forever. I was like, no, yoga can't be online, but there really are a lot of possibilities. There's even, and I can't believe I'm going to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and give her a shout out because I shouldn't do it. My producer is going to be so mad at me, but there's a wonderful woman and there's a thing on YouTube called Yoga with Adriene, and she's great. She's been on my show, and there's lots of free stuff out there, and you can easily find some practices and try them out and see how they fit on you. And I think you'd be surprised, even just a little bit, like 5 minutes in a day of doing a little breathing and moving can have a pretty big impact. I think folks would be surprised to find that out.
Yeah, it is that impactful. If you move with purpose, 5 to 10 minutes a day, Heidi's finding that that's much more effective than somebody going out and doing exercise for 45 minutes 3 times a week, because you're constantly getting that movement and that presence.
I think that's true. If someone has a goal of like peak fitness, if you want to be able to run farther or jump higher, then going to the gym every day or running every day will feel great and you'll totally get benefit, But if what you want is to just feel okay, like I was saying earlier, and you're like forcing yourself to do these workouts that are kind of miserable and you wish you didn't have to do them,
Yep.
I don't actually think that works. So if people are just looking for well-being and they're not trying to be peak athletes, then these simpler practices go a really long way.
Yes.
And people are sometimes surprised, like they see a video of me doing these really simple things, inhale arms up and exhale arms down, and they're like, what's that going to do? And it's hard to find words to describe how simple practices like that can actually have a profound impact on me having less pain and feeling better about who I am,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I watch sometimes in amazement Heidi as she does these really super simple things, and it's like, wow. The next day, it's like, that happened?
Yeah. Well, the cool thing about that is when it isn't an extreme physicality, there is all this room to be noticing and exploring and experiencing. And it does get very exciting when you're not pushing your body as far as you can. You get to then, end up cultivating these other patterns of like setting boundaries, Some days I feel good, and so I set a boundary here, and some days I don't feel good, so I set a boundary here. And knowing how I feel and being able to set a boundary accordingly relates to what we were saying before in terms of knowing what you need and making the choices to bring those things to you.
Beautiful. So I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
Well, I pondered this question quite a bit, and I struggled a little bit because a long while back, I embraced this very non-achievement oriented practice. And in that, I sort of tried to do away with this idea of success or failure. I try to really think of things in this very process oriented way. But to not totally avoid your question, I did think back to one moment, and it was like a moment of personal failure that I always will remember. I told you earlier that I opened a yoga center,
Mm-hmm.
and it was in the first year that I had this center, and I was first hiring employees. They were independent contractors, but I was hiring yoga teachers to teach at the center. There's one particular yoga teacher who was fantastic. I really liked her so much, but she was flaky and she would be late. And I was really stressed out because it was the first year and she was always giving me headaches. And like one day she came into teacher class and I just completely snapped on her and like basically kind of fired her right there on the spot in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't treat her like a person. I was like,
Mm.
and I really destroyed a friendship. And even like I totally felt bad about it within the hour and then went and apologized to her, like I really screwed up. And she forgave me some, but it really did. It was a moment where I thought, you know what, for whatever I do as a professional yoga person, I have to be true to the yoga and I have to treat people in the way that is in line with my beliefs. So that was my failure, and I overcame it in at least having the awareness to know that I had did that,
Mm-hmm.
and to then not do that again. I can say I don't have a regret like that ever since.
Nice. I had something happen. So I did a lot of work around a place called Landmark Education in the early 90s. And they're all about taking on big stands for your life. And one of the stands that I took for my life was that I said to myself, I'm going to be the kindest man that anybody ever meets. That's who I stand for me in my life. And it sounds to me like that was a broken piece for you in that sharing. And for me, I know when I don't do it because I'm not always the kindest man that anybody ever meets, but it becomes a learning moment for me. And then I get to reflect back on, all right, that's what I did. And how would I do it differently?
I think that's right. And I always, on my show, finish on a note of kindness. I ask, please, can we be kind to ourselves and can we be kind to others? Because I think that's the sauce. That's the sauce, the
Big time.
special ingredient that certainly has prevented me from treating people in that way again.
Yeah. So in the same tone, then, my next question for you is, what do you consider your biggest success?
I think that for myself, I feel that I've been successful in holding a line of integrity. And I hope that doesn't sound arrogant, but there are some teachers before me who, when things hit the mainstream as I described, could have really sold out in a way that other people did, but they didn't do that. And they kind of held a certain line of integrity. And I'm really trying to carry that baton. This idea of changing the dialogue of, yoga is about wanting to maintain a certain integrity and authenticity. So a lot of that has meant keeping a certain independence about what I'm doing and a certain level of just honesty, I think. So if there's one thing I'm doing well right now, I think is just being really honest about and transparent about everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if I have one success, it's in my ability to be honest about what I'm doing and why.
Nice. And what drives you?
Well, I did mention my mother earlier, and I think that having that experience of her death so early in my life and kind of going down a downward spiral towards a dark hole and finding a light that made that not necessary, I think that has really become my overriding drive, is continuing to facilitate that in myself and wanting to share that and spread that with other people. Because I try not to get too highfalutin, but I really do think that the personal work that we've talked about some today is also the healing of the planet. That the more people tend to their own gardens, the more they, like I said, they don't have the same separation from other people and their environment. And then we want to tend to that as well. So I really do think it's like my way of contributing in some small way to like humanity being more in harmony with this planet.
Wow. And so you speaking of people tending their own garden, that could be tending their own internal garden with yoga, or going out in your garden and getting your hands dirty and tending your garden?
Well, when you came on my show, I told you I've dabbled some in my own life and certainly think that it's true that
Yeah.
there's a metaphor and not a metaphor. There's an actuality of going out and growing food and ingesting that food. It is a miracle and a wonder to behold that is possible and that we get a chance to experience it. So it is a profound yoga to grow food.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no kidding. So you mentioned me being on your show. So I was on your show recently, and we had such a great time. I was like, man, you got to come and talk to us about yoga. So thank you for that.
Oh, very welcome. I'm so happy to have the exchange with you.
If you could recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be and why?
You know, it's funny this question too, because I went through a long list of like yoga books that I was thinking of because I think I was trying to impress your listeners. I was like, let me give them a really smart yoga book from a yoga teacher. And then I thought, no, that's lame, man. So ultimately, when I let go of that, the book that jumped into my head is this book called Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl Strayed. I don't know if you know that book.
I don't.
But she had another book that she wrote that became a big movie with Reese Witherspoon. But she, for a long time, had kind of like an advice column called Dear Sugar.
Uh-huh.
And this advice column was compiled into this book called Tiny Beautiful Things. And it is just individual people writing to her about their stories and her responding to it. And it is a profoundly it's difficult. Like there's lots of difficult stuff in it, but it's a very life affirming book. And it's a book that really made my heart soar. So I thought that would be a great book to recommend.
That is perfect. That's the reason I asked this question, by the way. And
Good.
As you were sharing, I was getting tingles all the way down my body. It's like, oh, I got to go find that book.
You will not be disappointed.
Nice. And what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
Oh gosh, I am also very hesitant to give anybody any advice, but it is my humble request that be kind. You said it earlier, but I really think that it's the most important thing, that if we can find a sense of kindness towards ourselves, which is maybe where it starts, which is a lot of what I try to teach, is if we can do breathing and moving exercises with care and kindness towards ourselves, we can establish that precedence. And I really think that if we can have kindness towards ourselves and kindness towards others, that is the best possible thing that we can do, regardless of whatever other pursuits we may seek.
Amen to that. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Jay.
It's been a great pleasure. I could not have had a better time.
It has been a lot of fun, man. I love hanging out with you.
Well, I think it's always a pleasure for me as well to speak to folks who are looking to point people in healthy directions, that like-minded people who are resonating that kind of message. For me, I feel some camaraderie and I feel supported by that and reaffirmed by that. So, like I said, very happy to have this exchange and connection with you.
That made me smile inside. How can our listeners get a hold of you?
Well, it's very easy. You go to jbrownyoga.com and there's a whole bunch of stuff there. I have, like I said, these weekly live stream classes where you can take class with me live, or you can watch the most recent class anytime, 24 hours a day. I also have a weekly teachers call, which your wife might be into. It's like this amazing group of yoga teachers from around the world, and we have a video call each week where we have these very amazing conversations. It's quite supportive. And other than that, let's see. I've got the podcast, Jay Brown Yoga Talks. I've got the blog. I still write a blog. Not many people do, but I put one out every month. And all that stuff is easily found at jbrownyoga.com.
Nice. And that's not Jay Brown.
Nope, that's just letter J, BROWN, yoga.com. And if you just type letter J space Brown into Google, it'll all pop up.
Nice. Nice. Well, once again, thank you so much for spending this 45 minutes or so with us. I'm smiling inside.
Well, like I said, it's been a pleasure, and I'm wishing you and all your listeners well.
Yay. You can also find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/jbrown. Hey, if you've enjoyed this podcast and are interested in listening to my first podcast series, Freshly Green from 2007, you can subscribe to support the Urban Farm Podcast. With that, you will have access to Freshly Green and so much more bonus content. Visit urbanfarmpodcast.org to find out more and to pledge your support.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.